Hello everyone, we're going to make some buns, or I'm going to make some buns today, and you can make buns too while you're at home. And with buns, we're going to try to see what happens with yeast, or what is yeast. So yeast is a microorganism, and it's a very important part of making bread and buns, and in doing so, we are going to try to see what the interactions are between this microorganism and the other ingredients. So first things first, with the recipe here. There we go, the recipe's in the top left corner. So if you'd like to follow along or you'd like to make these buns at home, there is the recipe or the ingredients that you're going to need. This recipe should make just over a dozen or around a dozen buns. So if that's what you're looking for and you want to make some buns too, here you go. Something maybe you could try tomorrow if you're up for it. So going back to the video, we are going to first add in some warm water. So this is the 1.5 cups of warm water. You don't want it to be too hot, but you want to run the tap for a little bit till it gets nice and warm. And we're going to talk about that a bit later, why it needs to be warm. Why is that important for the yeast? But after the water is in, then you're going to want to add 3 tablespoons of sugar. So there's the 3 that are in. So once the sugar is in, next we're going to add 3 tablespoons of oil. I'm getting my oil out, pouring the oil in. So a thing to think about with yeast is going off the other video that I released about different types of microorganisms in soil. What kind of microorganism is yeast? Is it a fungi? Is it a bacteria? Is it a protozoa? This is maybe something you can think about, maybe something you can make questions with, and maybe something we're going to have to look up later. So after the oil goes in, we're going to put in the 3 tablespoons of shortening, or butter, or lard, whatever you want to use. So this is vegetable shortening. And the 1 egg. So with the vegetable shortening, if you want to cut down on that a little bit, 2 tablespoons or 2.5 should also do okay. The bun should turn out just fine. So we got the egg in, and after this, I'm just throwing the shell away. We're going to grab the spoon, and we're going to try to mix it all together a little bit so it gets like a nice... It doesn't have to be too mixed right now, but we want to have it mixed enough that it's not too clumpy. Some of the other clumps will be... we're going to whisk them out later, but right now it just wants to be mostly mixed. So to our sort of wet mix here, we are now going to add the first part of the flour. So at the beginning, we're just going to add 2 of the 3 2/3 cups of flour. So this is just 2 cups of flour, and we're just going to mix it, put that on top nicely so it doesn't go everywhere. And then the important part, the yeast. So when I was making this earlier today, I made a little bit of a mistake, and I actually put in a teaspoon of yeast to begin with. So you're going to see me put a teaspoon of yeast in here, but you want to put the whole tablespoon of yeast in at the time you're going from the beginning. However, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add 2 more teaspoons in just a minute so that we have the full tablespoon worth of yeast. But you want to put the whole tablespoon of yeast there at that point in if you can, and then you're going to want to mix it up. So you want to try to get all the clumps and all the dry ingredients and get that all mixed in the water. So the yeast really likes the warm water, and it needs that water to start activating and get going. Oftentimes yeast is stored in a fridge. So there we go, we're mixing away. Trying to get most of those clumps off the side, trying to get it nice and well mixed. So here I'm actually going to take a whisk, and I'm going to try to use a whisk, because there's still quite a few clumps, and the wooden spoon wasn't necessarily the greatest idea, so probably starting with a whisk would have been a better idea from the beginning. Also, my whisk, the handle doesn't always stay on the whisk part, so I think it pops off later, but doing the best we can with what we got. So once it's nice and mixed, we're going to now start our next step. So we're going to add in some flour. So this is the rest of the flour. This is about 1 2/3 cups. And at this time, you can also add the salt in. So I add the salt in a little bit later because you usually want to have the yeast mixed in with your flour a lot before you add the salt, so you don't necessarily want to put the salt and the yeast in at this time. But here's where I'm adding in that extra yeast from before that I forgot about. So if you're following along, you probably would want to put the tablespoon of yeast in with the first batch of flour. Sorry, so there we go. I'm adding in that last of the yeast, and it is now on top. You see that brown stuff on top, and now we're going to mix in. Oh, made a bit of a mess. So we're going to try to see and get as much of this mixture of this flour and this yeast into the rest of the bread. Oh, there goes the handle. So at this point, the whisk wasn't really doing very well. And if you have like a bread mixer, like a KitchenAid, that's going to be much better, or like a dough mixer with a dough hook, that'll be much better use. But I was trying to do it in a bowl to show for the video, so that didn't work so great. So at this point, you can start using your hands. So make sure that you wash your hands very well. We don't want to get sick. We don't want to contaminate the food. So before I had started all of this process, I scrubbed my hands with soap and water to make it so that the food wasn't contaminated. So here we go. We're going to mix. You want to get as much of that dough off the bottom. And actually, mine's pretty sticky. So you want to have a consistency that's not too dry and falling apart. You want a nice big solid ball. So if you need to, you can add a little bit extra flour here. So this isn't necessarily, this is more than the 3 2/3 cup, but I probably add about 1/8 of a cup more, or maybe 1/6 of a cup more flour in to the rest of the recipe here. So I'm going to add that in just right away. So there we go. I've added in a little bit more flour, and it's gonna. So hopefully it'll start making that nice ball. Look at that good. The good consistency in the middle. So there it is. It's getting to be one big consistency. It's sticking together, staying in the middle of the bowl. So next, you're going to want to knead it. So you're going to want to push it. You're going to want to massage the ball of dough, and you're going to want to try to squish it down and push it into the sides of the bowl. This also helps to activate the yeast and to get it going. And this is good for it to be rising too. So you're pushing some of the air out of the ball as you're doing this. So you probably want to knead for a few minutes. I did it for about 2 or 3. I sped this video up a little bit, but we don't want to make this too long. So there you go. A few minutes of kneading. And then after that's done, I put a bit of oil, and I spread oil around the bottom of the pan, so that when we let it rise in this in our container here, then it's not going to stick to the sides. So after oiling, then it's good. So then you're going to want to put it in the oven for about 30 minutes or another similarly warm spot. Probably cover it, and you're going to wait 30 minutes for it to rise. So that's what we're going to do next. So there's my ball, and that's how we're going to stick it. Get it ready for rising. So here we go with the dough rising. So this is over the span of 30 minutes. Put a time lapse on of it in a nice warm spot. And what are we thinking about here? So this is because of the yeast that the dough is rising. But something to consider is, why is it rising? What's filling it up? What does it need to stretch and grow like? What's the yeast doing? At this point, it's important to punch down the dough and to squish it and let the air, you'll hear it when you're squishing it down, but you want to punch it down and you want to make it back into a small ball again, and you're going to hear air being given off. So an important other thing to note is, where is that air? What is it? What is it coming from? Why is there air in this dough if there wasn't necessarily that before? So after you've punched it down and it's risen, you want to form it into nice little buns and put them on a pan. And then you're going to put them back in the oven or in that warm spot again, and you're going to let them rise again until they're double in size. So here's the buns. You can see that they're still rising a little bit more. At this point, you want to put them in the oven and you're going to let them bake for about 15 to 18 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And hopefully they come out and look like this. Thank you, everyone.